Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and hi-ho, it's time for a podcast. Let's talk about Christmas movies.
That's not bad, actually.
Yeah, you go all in on these things, Josh, one way or the other.
So. You do. So it is Christmas, yes.
Kermit was in both of the ones we're talking about, so I had to go with that character.
Kermit is key, yes. Mm-hmm. So, and it is Christmas time. Some days before Christmas, I think. I forget what day this is coming out, but Christmas is imminent. Yeah. And so, as we've done every year, most years, we are...
every year.
Right? Jason is a big proponent of holiday celebrations, and we have done that here at Awesome Movie Year. And we're doing it again. We are celebrating the holidays with, in this episode, actually 2 holiday movies from a couple of years that we have talked about in past seasons, both 1977 and 1992, and Kermit the Frog is involved in both. That's why we're kind of combining these. They are a couple of Muppet-related holiday films. First, from 1977, is Emmet Otter's Jug-Band Christmas, and from 1992, The Muppet Christmas Carol, both from Jim Henson Productions. Jim Henson was the director of Emmet Otter's Jug-Band Christmas. He passed away in 1990, and his son Brian directed The Muppet Christmas Carol. But the overall Muppet team is involved in both films. Jerry Juhl, who was a go-to writer for all Muppet projects for decades, is the screenwriter on both of these, and Kermit and other familiar Muppets and some unfamiliar Muppets show up here in both films.
Yeah, Kermit, they said, do you want to do the movies? And, he's agreeable. He's Kermit. He's always down for a project. So once he's on, the rest of the Muppets kind of line up behind him, except in that last Muppet movie, Muppets Most Wanted, which infuriated me because the entire premise is, even though they've been friends for 40 years, none of them can recognize that there's an imitator of Kermit. It was just so dumb. I wanted to kick it right in the balls, Josh.
Jason has very strong opinions about the Muppets, and
I love the Muppets, Josh, as you know.
I do know that, and this is many people love the Muppets, but I am not one of them. So
Ebenezer Scrooge is already here.
I don't know. I don't hate the Muppets. I'm kind of indifferent to the Muppets. Sometimes they're kind of fun. I kind of like that Muppets Most Wanted that you obviously hate, and the other better recent Muppet movie that Jason Segel kind of got going. They're fun. Some of that.
I like that one. That's the Muppets. That one's good, and I thought they were really off to a great reset with that. And then this new thing that they did, the Muppets, which is like their updated Muppet show on Disney Plus, that 6-episode thing, that was really good after the failed horrible relaunch of it on ABC. That was terrible, so as with these 2 films, I believe one is hit and one is miss, Josh.
Yeah. And I'm kind of neutral on both of these films, so we'll get your stronger reactions, but both of these are beloved holiday classics, really. I mean, that's why we're talking about them here, although Muppet Christmas Carol at least was not a huge hit initially, but I think both of these, thanks to frequent airings on television and rentals on VHS, as we've talked about a lot, especially with our seasons from the 1990s, that is a key element to the building of a following for a lot of these films. They've become these institutions of the holiday season.
And Emmet Otter from 77, got a lot of play on HBO starting in 78. And then it kind of moved over from there into other networks. So that really, in the 90s, Nickelodeon and ABC, it was made for Canadian Broadcast Company in 77. So that really took on a life via parents telling their kids to sit in front of the television and leave them alone for an hour.
Yes, and Emmet Otter is a made-for-TV movie that premiered in 1977 on the Canadian Broadcasting Company. It is based on a book that is a non-Muppet related book from 1971, written by Russell Hoban and illustrated by his wife, Lillian Hoban. The Muppet Christmas Carol also based on a book that people may have heard of called A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Interesting footnote on that one.
Yeah.
Didn't realize that.
So I don't have any data on like TV ratings for Emmet Otter, especially not from Canada. But as you say, Jason, it was rebroadcast many, many times. It made it to the US in 78 on HBO, which was a kind of a niche thing in 1978, I think. I assumed like, oh, there will be reviews of it from 1978 in US publications, but there were not. I assume because nobody had HBO, or very few people had HBO in 1978.
Yeah, I mean, but this is one of those things that, right, like, obviously it did well enough that they broadcast it 7,000 times that it was etched into our minds at some point, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm and it's interesting. Obviously, A Christmas Carol is the one you take on from Dickens because I feel like a Muppets, if they did A Tale of Two Cities, and at the end they had to give the guillotine to one of their characters, it wouldn't have come off too well.
Yeah, maybe not. The Muppet Great Expectations, something like that.
So I would love to hear Animal just use the words of Charles Darnay in A Tale of Two Cities. "'Tis a far thing I do than I ever done before."
Oh my God. Wow. So the Muppet Christmas Carol was not a huge hit at the box office, but it did okay. It grossed $27.2 million on its budget of $12 million, but I think there were higher expectations. It was the first Muppet movie released by Disney, although Disney did not yet own the Muppets. That didn't happen until 2004, but it was the beginning of this partnership between Jim Henson Productions and Walt Disney. It was the first Muppet movie made after the death of Jim Henson. So I think it opened at like 6th place in the box office or something like that.
If I'm not mistaken, Aladdin and Home Alone 2, where it's competition, not just movies in the theater, but literal direct competition, right? For the audience. So.
Yeah, something that families would be taking their kids to. So, but again, it's become beloved. Both of them have. Emmet Otter was nominated for 4 Emmys in 1981 by the time it made it to US television. And those are I believe it's probably daytime Emmys for children's programming. Was nominated for Outstanding Children's Program and for costume design and for lighting and for the original song, Where the River Meets the Sea, written by Paul Williams. And Paul Williams also got a nomination for The Muppet Christmas Carol. It was nominated for a Grammy for Best Musical Album for Children.
Paul Williams, who we talked about in the Smokey and the Bandit episode, where he plays, the kid of the moonshiner there who tells Smokey to go. But Paul Williams is kind of, I'm not going to say ubiquitous, but he's had so much work with the Muppets via the Muppet Show, and he had an Academy Award nomination for co-writing The Rainbow Connection. So he was a big star. I think I talked about it. There's that documentary on him. It's interesting because like he was like a big singer, and then he's like, I'm just going to keep being famous. So like he would do like Battle of the Network Stars or like Celebrity Circus. He just found a way to always stay in the spotlight, and his collaborations with the Muppets helped.
Yes, and that is a long-time collaboration. I mean, the songs in both of these, which were released, 15 years apart, both of them have songs by Paul Williams. So he's got this long association with the Muppets. And the music is...
That's it? That's all you got?
I think the music is some of the weakest elements of both of these.
Oh, I love that, man. Yeah. You know what? Because you're first of all, I 100% agree with you on Muppet Christmas Carol there. Like the songs are just not up to snuff. If you think of like Rainbow Connection, or like when you go back to like Muppets Take Manhattan, there's stuff like that. There's all this catchy music. Like their musicals are great, right? And I kind of like the music better in Emmet Otter's Jug-Band Christmas, but I do think there were maybe 2 good songs in Muppet Christmas Carol, The Last Sleep Before Christmas and It Feels Like Christmas. But I even think It Feels Like Christmas with that Ghost of Christmas Present, like did not do that song, did not give it the gusto that it could have had.
So yeah, and I can barely even remember these songs, and I watched this movie yesterday.
So. I'm giving you a lump of coal on this podcast.
Thank you. So reviews for these both were relatively positive. So starting with Emmet Otter, because it aired first in Canada, I did go to Canada for this. So not literally, of course, but figuratively.
Please use accordingly.
Yes, they do spell some things differently, so maybe that'll come across when I read this. So Bill Musselwhite in the Calgary Herald said,
"Oh yeah,
here and there, through the mists of aerosol snow, are bright gems, and you can always count on Jim Henson and his Muppets for a multifaceted program cut and polished into coruscating color. The story was well written and in the true spirit of Christmas, and the music by Paul Williams was delightful. The direction and camera technique are so good, you have a hard time realizing that those aren't real animals in some Ozark river bottom. Emmet Otter's Jug-Band Christmas may have been slightly advanced for the smaller children, but for everyone else, it was a total delight."
I watched it with Scarlett, my daughter, and we both really got into how weird it is. It's a very weird thing, right? And I like that about it. But also, like, these are like so cool. The art direction and production design. Even Josh, if you weren't into the story, like the sets that they made are so intricate and like amazing, and they're able to show the Muppets in like full body. Like I noticed in Muppet Christmas Carol, there's an ice skating sequence, and they just show them from the waist up, and I'm like, man, I remember Jim Henson like was so proud when like he was able to show Kermit and Miss Piggy riding the bicycles, and I think it was Muppet Movie, but if not, it was Muppets Take Manhattan or whatever. But like, so I felt like that was a cheat. Whereas on this one, you got Emmet Otter, you did see those full bodies, and like at one point, like the nightmare, the bad guy band,
Yes,
right?
right.
They're all riding snowmobiles, and I'm like, dude, they have Muppets riding snowmobiles, and it looks like real. And I'm like, they nailed this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think I wasn't really engaged with the story or the characters or the music in this, but the craftsmanship of it is just amazing still to look at that. And of course, something like this now would not be done this way. It'd be all CGI or whatever.
Yeah.
Even movies that are made with puppets or with stop motion are always enhanced with CGI. And so I wouldn't go so far as to say like, oh, I was fooled and I thought those could have been real animals. But
yeah, me neither, Josh. Thanks.
Yeah, right. No. I'm not saying, but that was what this critic is saying. But it is amazing, just the way that it's put together and the amount of detail that's in it, and the effort and the creativity that must have gone into immersing you in this world. And it really is just like an immersive world. The Muppets themselves are often hanging out in sort of real world type environments, especially in their movies. But this is its own like fantasy realm, almost like the Dark Crystal or something, to talk about another Jim Henson production. And that was really impressive to me, even though I found the rest of it to be sort of a snooze.
Yeah, you've mentioned a few times you're not a fan of the story. Next review, let's go, brother.
All right. Someone else who was not a fan of this at all is Tom Shales in the Washington Post, who reviewed it in 1980 when it premiered on ABC. He said, although admirable and attractive as a piece of craftsmanship, the program suffers from a prosaic sense of illusion and a woebegone scenario, and it has all the warmth of a commercial for the smokeless ashtray. Children may find the fuzzy creatures cute, but they are basically inexpressive, and the actors' voices they are given never quite belong. Insipid songs by Paul Williams don't help either. Anthropomorphism may not be the crime against nature that the anti-whimsical forces like to claim, but Jim Henson and writer Jerry Juhl have taken it one step downward by making the animals insufferably cash-conscious and materialistic.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Right? Like, I mean, first of all, I haven't read the book, but I mean, I bet that's part of the element in there. But the point is that they're struggling to get by, and then they still do the things that they know are going to hurt their incomes to do something nice, Emmet for his mom and his mom for Emmet, right? So what does he want there? Does he want them to not care about being able to eat?
Yeah, I don't know. And he spends much of this review later really harping on this point about how these characters are materialistic, and that is an ongoing theme of the Jim Henson productions here. By this point, the Muppet movie had been released, which I think it had not when this first premiered on the CBC. And
Right.
he sort of connects those two, saying that Henson is obsessed with this idea of money and stardom, because of course here Emmet and his mother also, one of the ways the main way they try to get money is by entering this talent contest, and they're both musically inclined and they want to win to get money for each other.
I mean, literally, the Muppet Show is a show about Muppets putting on a show. So what does this guy like? Does he not get the Muppets at all? Is that it, or what?
Seemingly maybe not. I'm not sure his overall opinion of the Muppet Show. He definitely seems to have not maybe cared for the Muppet movie. But yeah, I mean, and furthermore, Emmet Otter here, it's really about like
doing something for the other character.
Yeah, and about poverty and struggling and things like that. I mean, serious themes that are not, there's not just about like, oh, I want to be famous or something like that. I mean, I suppose you could argue that the Muppets, the main Muppets, are interested in that kind of stuff, but these characters are just trying to scrape by. It's actually quite stark, really, for something aimed at children.
Right. And as I said, like, it's like, oh, well, if I do this, it's going to ruin my coat, or it's going to ruin Ma's, her jug, whatever. Right. But they do it to try to win something for the other character. It's not like I'm doing this and I know I'm ruining something that belongs to someone else, but it's worth it because I'm going to win the money and then I can do whatever I want with it. They're trying to buy something for the other person, the other, otter here, not person, Josh, because I also know they're not real.
Right. Well, you could say person. I mean, they're imbued with human qualities, but yeah, you're right. I feel like that's, as much as I was not a huge fan of this, I feel like that is sort of a strange complaint that he brings up, and it is his primary complaint about this, it seems like. So
next,
the Muppet Christmas Carol got seemingly mixed to positive reviews. Siskel and Ebert gave it, they split on it, although they mostly seem to agree that they were both kind of in the middle. But Ebert gave it the marginal thumbs up, while Siskel gave it the marginal thumbs down. And both of them seem to think that the main strength of this film was Michael Caine's performance as Ebenezer Scrooge, and they were less enthused about the other elements. But Ebert liked the other elements enough to kind of give this a positive. So they were split on that. And in his written review, Roger Ebert said, Michael Caine is the latest of many human actors, including the great Orson Welles, to fight for screen space with the Muppets, and he sensibly avoids any attempt to go for a laugh. He plays the role straight and treats the Muppets as if they are real. It is not an easy assignment. The movie, directed by Brian Henson, son of the late Muppet creator Jim Henson, follows the original fairly faithfully. Like the earlier three Muppet movies, it manages to incorporate the Muppets convincingly into the action. We may know they're puppets, but usually we're not much reminded of their limited fields of movement. It could have done with a few more songs than it has, and the merrymaking at the end might have been carried on a little longer, just to offset the gloom of most of Scrooge's tour through his lifetime spent spreading misery.
So, Josh, let me take 2 points there. Michael Caine is quoted as saying, I'm going to play this movie like I'm working with the Royal Shakespeare Company. I will never wink. I will never do anything Muppety. I'm going to play Scrooge as if it's an utterly dramatic role and there are no puppets around me. So that's a good piece of motivation for his performance there.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Ebert that's absolutely the right approach, and he is the best. He's so good in this movie that my thought on this, as someone who's not super into the Muppets, was like, I would have been happy with this movie if the Muppets had been removed.
Sadly, Josh, I don't think the Muppets were utilized nearly as effectively in this movie as, of course, as in many of their other movies. The whole thing misses for me on this one. All the Muppets, that whole idea of joy and merriment, like it's nowhere in the movie,
Even at the end, you don't think?
Yeah, it is for like 3 minutes, but that's okay, right?
I mean, that's the Scrooge story. As Ebert points out, it's gloom and doom and then the redemption at the end.
Right. So maybe it's not the right project. It's a very strange, because Jerry Juhl, who you mentioned, is such a good writer. He wrote most of the Muppet shows and like really captures them. I feel like the characters are all missing here. Like, and what we see of them isn't what we're used to seeing of them. Like Miss Piggy has one scene where she hi-yahs, but otherwise she's just like, nice Miss Piggy, subdued Miss Piggy, none of the Miss Piggy that we know at all. Like, it just felt like they were retrofitting them in there as opposed to giving them the showcases for the characters that they are.
Right. Well, I think you're right. And I think that is all on purpose, is that the idea here is to make A Christmas Carol and put the Muppets. I think it's sort of telling in a way that the opening credits have it as if the Muppets are, quote, actors, you know, and it says Kermit the Frog as Bob Cratchit, Miss Piggy as it's as if these characters that we know as showbiz people, as you were just describing before, have now decided to act in a production of A Christmas Carol.
Okay, but I don't think anyone's like, oh, I'd really like to see Miss Piggy take on the role of Scarlett O'Hara. You know what I mean? It's like,
oh, I disagree. I bet there are a lot of people who would think that.
Yeah. Well, Josh, you know, I know you haven't seen Kramer versus Kramer. Maybe we could get Miss Piggy and Kermit to play those parts.
Yes.
But I just think, like, when you go to see the Muppets, and especially this is for kids, right? You want to see the Muppets be the Muppets. So, like, even if he's playing Bob Cratchit, you still want Kermit to be fun Kermit or whatever, you know, or like over, you know, like even here, like he's kind of overworked, but he's like, oh, can you just give us Christmas off? Like, as opposed to like when he's got too much going on in the Muppet Show and his like, he's frazzled and everything like that. It's more fun, you know? I didn't think there was any fun in this one. So,
yeah, I mean, I think this is a movie that, like I said, has become this timeless classic. And if people love the Muppets, a lot of people who love the Muppets do love this movie. And I never had that thought that you did. I guess maybe because I wasn't as attached to the idea of the Muppets being a certain way. But, you know, again, to me, I was just engaged. If I was engaged, it was because this is a good telling of the Dickens story. And the Muppets are sort of like the icing on the top or whatever.
Yeah, well, I just didn't have any fun with it. You know, I liked the first 10, 15 minutes before the ghost came and then the last 5, 10 minutes after. But I just thought the middle just misses completely for me.
Yeah. Well, Janet Maslin in the New York Times was also kind of underwhelmed, but mildly positive. She said, "The Muppet Christmas Carol is not one of those clever children's films that keep adult escorts from gazing longingly at the exit signs. What you expect, Muppets, is pretty much what you get. There's no great show of wit or tunefulness here, and the ingenious cross-generational touches are fairly rare. But there is a lively kiddie version of the Dickens tale, one that very young viewers ought to understand. Much of the music is also on the saccharine side, but little children should like that reasonably well, just as they enjoy crowd scenes featuring Muppet vegetables and other talking toys. The screenplay by Jerry Juhl is less inventive, but then it must cope with the challenge of retelling Dickens in terms that will register with young children. In this regard, the film does work well, bringing home the story's impact and reinforcing its central message."
I think they're not giving enough credit to children.
Yeah.
You know, children can follow these stories. It's really easy.
Right.
So I would have liked to have seen a little more innovation on this.
Right. Well, and you watched this, Jason. You mentioned you had watched this with your daughter some number of years ago, and then again with her this time, correct?
So we watched it together, and neither of us had seen it the first time when I had seen it. And we were both very much disliked it. And we've watched every Muppet movie together, you know, at that point in time. We were literally going from Muppet movie all the way up through Muppets Most Wanted, right? So yeah, we were very underwhelmed. This time I watched it on my own and I started to get into it a little more. And then it just, you know, just goes right off that cliff so fast for me.
And when you watched it with your daughter and she didn't have trouble following the Dickens story or anything like that, I would think.
No, I don't think, I mean, like, why is he making it sound, or she's making it sound like it's this really complex thing? It's bad guy gets visited by 3 ghosts, changes his ways so he's not a jerk anymore, right?
Right.
Like, it's not any more complex than, like, you know, the Great Muppet Caper, where they have to figure out who the jewel thief is or something like that.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, even in 1992, this is a story that's been told so many times in so many formats that there's a good chance kids will be familiar with it because they've seen it with some other cartoon character or something like that.
Yeah, like, didn't we all see it with Mickey Mouse at some point in time?
And that version had come out in the 80s, so it certainly existed. In fact, when Siskel and Ebert talk about this, they mention the Mickey Mouse version. So Yeah, I think that you're right. Maybe she's not giving kids enough credit, or she's overstating the need for this to be simplified in order to reach children.
Right. And I think they should have gone the opposite way, because that was the beauty of the Muppets. Like, they weren't afraid to challenge their audiences, and I'm not saying like in any type of, like, they would play the joke if it's funny. And if it was like an intellectual joke, then some kids, maybe it goes over their head, or maybe they reach to it, right? And they obviously were not afraid to challenge themselves with like set building, and like seeing how can we make the Muppets do things. Like Miss Piggy's got that great water ballet number in one of the movies. I think that might be Muppet Caper also, right? So, they're not afraid to take these chances. And I felt like this one played it very, very safe.
Yeah. So you watched this with your daughter a few years ago. Had you seen it, and had you seen Emmet Otter like as a kid? Did there these things that you grew up with?
No, I mean, I grew up with the Muppets and the Muppet movies, so much so that when I was a young fella, Josh, just a boy, when I was just a boy, Josh, and, my brother and I, when we would go up to bed, I would always pretend to go to sleep. And then once he fell asleep, I was allowed to come back downstairs, and I would sit on my grandpa's lap and we'd watch the Muppet Show together. So
Wow.
that's a great memory. And Scarlett and I have gone through many of the Muppet canon together, much of the Muppet canon. We've watched all the movies. We've watched a couple of seasons of the Muppet Show, which is now available. And it's really fun. I went to the Jim Henson exhibit at the Skirball in LA a few years ago. Like, I love the Muppets, man.
Yeah.
So I want to see them at their best, because that's what I love about them. Emmet Otter, I don't know when it came into my life. I don't think as a kid. I think it was just one of those weird things that you would hear about. And then you're like, what is this? It might have even been a few years ago. I heard about it on the internet and we watched it. And then I was like, this is cool. And then I hadn't revisited it until this. Muppet Christmas Carol, I had avoided because I knew my brother didn't like it. And then when I went through the whole canon, I watched all those ones in the 90s, which is the weakest period for the Muppets. This and Muppet Treasure Island. And then, I think Muppets in Space maybe a little better. But
what about Muppet Great Expectations?
Yeah, that's right. So where we have to get who's going to play Mrs. Havisham on that one? That's what we have to figure.
Miss Piggy has to play Miss Havisham, right?
Well, you would think so, but they just underutilized her in this. I don't know if I want to see, I want to see her get the gusto on the next one.
Yeah, but that seems like a better part, because she can kind of swoon around and be all dramatic. And I mean, I guess she could play the main love interest, right?
Yeah.
You get her and Kermit as Pip. And I forget the name of the character, but the female lead in that, she is very kind of hot and cold with Pip, right? That's sort of the point. So this is really unnecessary.
That sounds like Miss Piggy, though.
Yeah,
like,
it might work. So maybe Fozzie in drag is going to play Miss Havisham or something like that.
Yeah, well, here he's, running a rubber chicken factory in Old England. So.
He is, yeah. They needed a lot of rubber chickens in Victorian England.
That's right. Forget vaccinations and
chickens.
Clean water.
Yeah,
rubber chickens was where it was.
Yeah.
How about you, Josh? Your history with these? I know your sister loves Muppet Christmas Carol.
Oh my God!
And
yeah,
she's stabbing her in the heart as we speak.
She's gonna hate both of us, because not only does she love it, but I'm pretty sure is one of her favorite movies of all time. Not just Christmas movies or Muppet movies, but movies period. And weirdly, despite her love for it, I never saw it as a kid. I mean, this came out when we were slightly older kids in 1992, but still, I never watched it then. And I had not watched it until a few years ago when I was doing a bunch of write-ups on Christmas movies and watched it. And I thought it was okay. And I kind of feel about the same way about it now. I'm with Siskel and Ebert that Michael Caine is the best thing in it. And I had never seen Emmet Otter's Jug-Band Christmas. I had heard of it like you as kind of a interesting outlier in the Jim Henson canon. But not to harp on this, but I've never been a particular fan of the Muppets. I am neutral on most of their stuff. I did watch, I think, maybe the Muppet movie or the Muppet Caper or one of those early Muppet movies as a kid. I don't really remember much about them, but and the recent ones I've seen, the Muppets and Muppets Most Wanted, which again, I both thought were fine. My reaction to the Muppets generally ranges from like, not great to, that was fun. So that's, and that's kind of where I fell on this one as well. So,
well, I guess what's interesting here is that like I'm a Muppet fan,
right?
And you're Josh, and but we both came away like, obviously I like Emmet Otter more than you, but we both came away feeling the same way. It sounds like on Muppet Christmas Carol.
Well, I think I actually liked Muppet Christmas Carol more than you, in part because I wasn't really invested in the Muppet-ness of it. And
right. There you go. So that's interesting. So
yeah.
How about you, Dave?
I apparently loved the Muppets as a kid, but this is one of those things that I just don't. Yeah, this is one of those things I don't really remember. My mom tells me I was obsessed with them, just like Remo Williams, as we discovered.
I feel like your mom is gaslighting you, and she's just like got a list of things to pretend that you liked as a kid.
Were you like in a child work camp, and now she's just like, oh, you used to watch Smurfs every day, when really you were the one shoveling the coal or whatever?
It's very possible, because I don't remember what Muppets things I liked or any of it, but I'm sure I saw it all back then. But yeah, I haven't watched any of it as an adult, so this was my first time watching anything Muppet related in decades.
Did you watch it with Gina? Or?
She was on her phone. She looked up, but we liked comparing some of them to our pets, so that was about it.
Yeah, that is good.
Except none of the Muppets are dead and still living with you.
Jeez. I will say that I think the one Muppet thing that I did like a lot as a kid is a thing that hardcore Muppet fans I think hate, which is the Muppet Babies. I was a big fan of that as like a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah, I like the Muppet Babies. I don't know why you would hate the Muppet Babies.
I don't know. I think like Muppet purists don't like it.
Yeah, well, that's getting a little too deep into the forest for me to follow you into there.
Fair enough. Yeah. Do you want to mention anything on the background of these films, Jason?
Yeah, no, Josh, on Emmet Otter, inspired by The Gift of the Magi. Did you know that, by O. Henry?
Yeah, that was the inspiration for the original book, which is a very famous story that I have not read. But it's a similar concept about the people who are both sacrificing something in order to get a Christmas or a holiday present for each other, and end up sacrificing everything, I think.
And as I said, like even Jim Henson said they really tested themselves, like with the set building, so they can pop into scenes and show these wide shots and Muppets doing things and showcase the sets from really different angles. There were, and I'm no expert here, so I'm just reading this out loud, Josh. There were multiple methods of puppetry used in Emmet Otter's Jug-Band Christmas. Obviously, the Muppet hand puppets, but also marionettes and bunraku and black theater techniques.
Sure. Yeah, you can see some of the wires occasionally in this where they're doing that kind of marionette technique, which I know is not a complaint. It's not a complaint. Yeah. So we'll come back then and talk more of our general thoughts on these Muppet Christmas movies. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this special Christmas episode, we are talking about a couple of Christmas movies from the Muppets: Emmet Otter's Jug-Band Christmas from 1977 and The Muppet Christmas Carol from 1992. And Jason, as a hater of The Muppet Christmas Carol, what I wonder, and what I keep saying is that I like Michael Caine here as Scrooge. I like the telling of the story, the Dickens story. Are you a fan of A Christmas Carol? Do you enjoy other tellings of that story?
I don't mind it one way or the other. Now we're reversing here, Josh. You're so Dickensian. You go to all those reenactments dressed as your pauper. So no, I don't mind it. But I never cared for it one way or the other. Like, I wasn't into it or I wasn't against it. I honestly wouldn't mind if Michael Caine like even pushed a little further into the assholeness of the character. But to me, like, it's not A Christmas Carol featuring the Muppets. It's called The Muppets Christmas Carol, right? So like, I went in thinking, oh, awesome, it's going to be the Muppets, doing stuff. But like I said, like, Gonzo, who here is Charles Dickens, right, is basically used for exposition and nothing else, right? That is, and I had read they were saying like, well, who would be the least likely to pay Charles Dickens, and they chose Gonzo. Although I would argue Animal would probably be the least likely, but it's a waste of Gonzo, right? What Gonzo is, he comes in, he's crazy, he's trying stunts, he's doing all this wild stuff. So to just see him, oh, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then they give like the comedy to Rizzo, who's hit or miss, like it just falls flat. Then you have Kermit playing Bob Cratchit, who's a nice guy, but there's really no personality to the Kermit character, right? Like, that could have been anybody. That could have been, the kid who played the nephew, who also had no personality in this thing, right? Um,
That's a
and
human, by the way.
yeah, that's a human who's done well for himself as an actor. I just don't think any of the humans other than Michael Caine, it all felt very vanilla. Am I wrong? Was there any human performance that stood out?
No, you're not wrong about that. I think the human performances are all pretty forgettable. But Michael Caine is really good, and I agree. I would have been happy to see him dive more into the darkness of Scrooge, which is something that Roger Ebert complains about and doesn't think is appropriate here. But I have seen many versions of A Christmas Carol, and not even necessarily because I love A Christmas Carol or because I love Charles Dickens, but because of various articles and reviews and whatever. It just pops up again and again and again and again. And I think it can be a really well told story. It's so familiar that you watch mediocre versions of it and you kind of shrug. But if you see a good version of it, especially for me, especially one that takes Scrooge seriously as a person, as a character who actually has feelings and goes through a real journey as a character over the course of the film, it can be really affecting. I mean, there's the 1951 version with Alastair Sim as Scrooge is just a really good movie, despite telling this very familiar story that you might think you would be bored with. So
I think you're making a good point, right? Like if that's the character and that's the level we all got to get to, and we've seen the Muppets get to that level in other movies against like Charles Grodin as a villain, or kind of Charles Durning as a villain. Like these are also great actors who really lean in, right? Like what I'm saying is we don't get there with any of them. Like I don't think any of them showcase any of the characteristics that we've come to love about them. And also and that not only hurts the movie, but it hurts the overall character development on all of these characters against Scrooge.
So what you're saying is that in other Muppet productions, you felt this sort of like genuine emotional response to the Muppets themselves doing things.
Yeah, exactly. Like they want to get to Hollywood in the Muppet movie, and Charles Durning, Doc Hopper, is trying to get Kermit to, be his spokesman on the Frog Leg restaurant, and then decides he's just going to kill him anyway. And like, you got all these great set pieces. Even, Kermit and Fozzie performing in like that Bayou bar, and, it's like a honky tonk style thing. And like, I think the interaction with the humans is so much more developed and full, and the Muppets feel like real characters. And here I feel like they're just stuck in, and they could have been any characters. They could have been, you could have said like, oh, well, instead of using Bunsen and Honeydew for this charity thing, we're going to make Bunsen and Honeydew the couple, of the Cratchits. And hey, maybe that's progressive and something we're experimenting with going forward. But like, I didn't feel like any of the Muppets had to be any of the characters that they were.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, again, this goes to my indifference to the Muppets, is that I can't imagine ever being emotionally affected by anything the Muppets have done, and don't think that I ever was. Even when I've enjoyed one of their productions, it's just kind of cute and fun. And so I wouldn't have hoped for that. To me, all of the emotional weight is carried here by Michael Caine. And you're right that the other human actors maybe could do more because there's not much that they bring to it. But the Muppets are just sort of like flavoring. They're just sort of comic relief.
Well, then you don't have a clear understanding of the Muppets, because Josh, in every other Muppet movie, they carry the emotional weight of it. So I understand what you're saying. Michael Caine is the main star and has to be the vessel of most of the emotional weight, but you can't say like Bob Cratchit shouldn't mean anything to the story then.
Well, no, but the story is, I mean, even in good versions of the story, Bob Cratchit isn't like this incredibly well-rounded character. All of the characters aside from Scrooge are sort of reflections of his journey as a person. Scrooge is the one, I think, in a good telling of A Christmas Carol, who has the dimensions. And everyone else is, I mean, you feel bad for Bob Cratchit because Tiny Tim is sick and because he's poor and he loves his family, but he's not this multifaceted person, really. And so what they're giving you with the Muppets as these characters is what these characters are.
Yeah, well, then maybe it's just a miss overall, because like I said, it didn't have any of the humor that I'm used to with Jerry Juhl. I liked Statler and Waldorf as Marley and Marley, the ghosts of Scrooge's old bosses. But otherwise, I just felt the whole thing was a miss. The ghosts, which I had read, were originally developed to be Muppet characters. And I think that would have been a way more interesting way to go with it. Ghost of Christmas Past was going to be Robin or Scooter. Miss Piggy would be the Ghost of Christmas Present. And then Gonzo or Animal, the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. I think that would have been far more interesting. I didn't think the ghosts added anything. They were boring. They couldn't sing. Just the whole thing is one big miss to me, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about the ghosts is that I understand that why they wouldn't have wanted one of the Muppet characters as those ghosts. I mean, they are Muppets in the sense that they're puppet characters. They're not humans, but they're not existing Muppet characters because they want, for right or wrong, they seem to want you to take that stuff seriously. And so they don't want Muppet antics in it.
Well, then why are the Muppets in the movie?
Right.
That's what I'm saying doesn't make sense at that point in time, Josh.
Yeah.
Like, look, this is not an example that you're going to love, but like Spirited, right? This year, right? Not saying it's a great movie, but like I remember all of the ghosts and they were all humorous and none of them stole from Ryan Reynolds, in that movie, like look, is Michael Caine not a good enough actor to hold his own against Miss Piggy? Of course he is,
Right. I don't want to get into the flaws of Spirited, but I mean, I don't think you're wrong. And I'm thinking of, Miss Piggy could have been something akin to, is it Carol Kane in Scrooged, who's one of the ghosts there who does a lot of wacky stuff?
Yeah, and that you got a lot of great characters in there.
Right. And you still get the story there, even though those ghosts are being wacky. So I guess I'm agreeing with you that could have been fine, but I don't really care that it's not there. I think what is there is also fine.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, let's move on to Emmet Otter, which I liked. I really like how weird it is. I think the songs are very weird in this competition. I love the idea that they're having a talent show and everyone is in town is going to be part of it. And they all prepare these like strange, like, Appalachian style, songs or whatnot. And I thought really the sets were some of the best I've seen in like any type of puppet movie. Like they were so detailed, like the houses look so cool. Not just the houses, but the backgrounds with the snow-capped mountains or when they're riding on the river, I just really got into that one. I thought that was a real, like a lot of the chances I felt weren't taken on Muppet Christmas Carol. They took big chances, whether you liked them or not in Emmet Otter.
Right. And I wonder if, because this is not labeled as a quote Muppet movie, and the only appearance we get from familiar Muppet characters is Kermit as this sort of narrator. He has an introduction and then he shows back up at the beginning. And actually, I guess he did narrate it like in voiceover in the original version, but because of copyright issues, because the Muppets are now owned by Disney, but this particular production is not owned by Disney, that they can't use as much Kermit in the versions that are available to watch now. But I mean, other than his whatever presence he has, there are no other familiar Muppet characters, but you're not expecting those characters to appear here, right?
I'm not. I do recognize a few of them from like the Muppet Show. Sometimes they have musical numbers like of that, like kind of, whatever you want to call it, like hillbilly bands or whatnot, and some of them are used here and there. But yeah, no, these are characters specific to Emmet Otter. And like characters are not the highlight of this one. I agree with you on that. Like, you get to know Emmet and Ma a little, but other than that, the Nightmare Band is really like kind of like this, I guess, like over the top take on like, we're the bad boys from the bad side of town, the Nightmare Band from Riverville or whatever it is, so. But I did like, I thought there was enough sweetness there to carry the whole thing. And it made me laugh a bunch. Not necessarily because it was funny, but because it was so just weird.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on the intricacy of all of the design. And I think even more so than the Muppet Christmas Carol, which is a Disney-funded theatrical release, versus this, which was a Canadian Broadcasting Company TV special. And yet the amount of detail and artistry in the design of this film, I think, is greater even than in the Muppet Christmas Carol. And that was what carried me because, again, I don't know. I didn't think it was that weird. It's like you said, it's kind of the story of the Gift of the Magi, which maybe isn't as famous as A Christmas Carol, but is a familiar kind of holiday fable, I guess. And so it was mildly engaging to me story-wise. As you say, the characters are kind of bland. The Nightmare Band is fun, but I don't know. I wasn't really crazy about the songs. So really just watching the way that this was put together, I feel like was what carried me through the running time of this more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. I mean, that's fine, like it's not going to hook you on everything. That's okay. Dave, what did you think of these two films, as we say in Ireland?
These films. I'm with you actually, Jason, on this Emmet Otter. It was super weird, and that's what I liked about it. I just thought the characters were just ridiculous. The songs. I mean, the one that I wrote down, the bathing suit that Grandma Otter wore, is just
Right.
such a ridiculous, and that kicks the movie off, and you're just kind of like, oh, okay, I'm. This is just going to be nonsense, like for the next hour, So yeah, I really like this one. The Muppet Christmas Carol, I thought was just fine. I agree. It's like, why are we making this a Muppet movie if it's not going to be wacky and fun and Muppety? It's just, it's Michael Caine being a great actor surrounded by Muppets. It's like the meme that goes around every few months. What movie would you want to see replace everybody except one actor, with Muppets?
Right.
It reminded me of that. It's like it's just the exact movie, just the other people are Muppets.
I mean, I feel like that's one reason, Jason, why I think even fans of the Muppets often would disagree with you about this, because they just want to see the Muppets do something, and that like Miss Piggy as Scarlett O'Hara, to use your example, would be something that people would want to see.
Yeah, I mean, if they let her play it as Miss Piggy, that's fine. But if she just had to just fit into a rigid interpretation and have no personality of Miss Piggy, then that's boring. Like I mentioned a few other Muppet projects that just stunk. When they tried to reboot the Muppet Show and try to make it cool and like edgy, it was a horrible interpretation. It made me dislike the characters. So when they rebooted it again, with this 6-episode kind of like internet style show on Disney Plus, where Bunsen and Honeydew are doing experiments every week, and there are weird things, and everyone's got their own segment that makes sense. Gonzo's trying to do a stunt. Like, it rang true to what I knew of the Muppets, and not just what I knew, but like where we've seen them excel before. So like when I mentioned Muppets Most Wanted, that's what just like, you've taken 40 years of a history that's been built and just ignored it for a silly plot point. Like, I can't get into that. And I think that's where I'm at, is like, I want the Muppets to be the Muppets.
All right. Well, I feel like Jason is the embodiment of that classic Onion article. I appreciate the Muppets on a much deeper level than you. But
no, I'm just saying. I mean, maybe than
which
you,
is fine.
but,
yeah.
So
no,
sorry, Josh.
No. I'm glad that you have the passion for this, and I would not ever criticize giving deep thought to any sort of piece of popular entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's more to it than just sticking him in something for the sake of sticking him in something.
Right. And it does seem like that was a trend that this was emblematic of, and that period, as you're saying, in the 90s with the Muppets Treasure Island and the Muppets from Space. And I think there was a thing going around on the internet. I should have looked this up like a month or two ago. It was a document from when Disney had bought the Muppets, and it was this list of all these potential Muppet projects that they were working on. And a lot of them were just like Muppets in X,
Right. And that's why that reboot with Siegel and Stoller was such a big deal, and why it was such a big success, right? And Brett McKenzie, who did all the music, like that, why that worked, Josh, was because that was true to the spirit of the Muppets, right? It was, hey, we got to put on a show. Even we saw like Kermit hadn't been with the gang in so long and whatnot. Like, that was at least believable, right? And I just think like there had to be a reason that we got to the point where they needed a reboot, and it was because of all these failed attempts to just like, brand them as part of Disney, as opposed to like, like, it's not like Jim Henson just threw them in everything. It's not like, like the Doc Hopper thing. It's not like you then saw Gonzo and Camilla the chicken afterwards doing commercials for KFC, right? Like, he was very careful with how he chose and built his world, right?
Right.
So,
and maybe it's telling then that this is the first thing that they did after he died.
I think so. I think, and it was dedicated to him and another performer who had died, Richard Hunt. But I do think, yeah, the Brian Henson directed Muppet movies are not good. Neither of them.
All right. Well, should we rate these two pieces here?
Sure. Out of five
Muppets?
Yeah, there we go.
I don't know.
5 puppet Muppets, 5 hands inside of felt,
Sure.
5 Muppets.
Yeah.
Okay, I got 3.5 for Emmet Otter. I got 2.5
Okay.
for Muppet Christmas Carol.
I'm going to go with 3 for each. I'm saying the same thing, but my feeling about the Muppets is they're fine. So, Dave?
I'll go 3.5 Emmet Otter. I'll go 3 for Muppet Christmas Carol.
All right. So, sorry, Brandy, my sister, that we're not
you don't
giving this the
go cry
enthusiasm
in
that you would
Chile.
have. Yeah. We'll come back and talk about the legacy of these Muppet Christmas movies. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this special holiday episode, we are talking about the Muppet Christmas productions, Emmet Otter's Jug-Band Christmas and the Muppet Christmas Carol. And I feel like Jason especially has talked a lot here about the legacy of the Muppets as sort of characters and as a property who, again, Jim Henson, the creator, died in 1990. The Muppets themselves were sold to Disney in 2004. They continue to be a major property for Disney, although maybe, as you're sort of alluding to, Disney has not always known exactly what to do with them as characters, but there's something that is always going to come back up. So do you have overall, Jason, what is your favorite Muppet project?
I mean, I love the Muppet Show, but from a movie standpoint, that first Muppet movie, the Muppet movie, is like a 5-star movie to me. And after that, when you get to The Great Muppet Caper and Muppet Takes Manhattan, I think those are 4 and 4.5 star movies, one way or the other. Those original 3 are just home runs. And then when you get to the Seagull one, that's when it gets back on track. But I think the Seagull one was probably about 2011. In 2008, there was a Christmas special called The Muppets Christmas Letters to Santa. And that was really good. Like, that was funny and utilized the characters correctly and utilized the celebrities correctly. Because that's also part of the fun, is seeing how they interact with these different celebrities, whether they're playing themselves or characters, right? Like, so that's on Disney Plus now. I would also recommend that.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I know we talked about it beforehand. I didn't have time to watch it. And again, if there's a new Muppet thing, I'm kind of whatever about it. Did you watch, wasn't there the Muppets Haunted House or something where they
it was good.
Mansion? Yeah.
They did a good job. I was a little, pissed off, as I mentioned, about Muppets Most Wanted. Although the songs, Brett McKenzie, he's perfect for this. Like,
yeah.
And supposedly they said in 2019 he was developing a big screen version of Emmet Otter's Jug-Band Christmas, which would be super fun. But I do like the songs in that one. And I thought, the thing about that Muppet Haunted House is, like, they have really deep cut references from Muppet fans, like of Muppets you haven't seen since the Muppet Show, maybe, and stuff like that. So I think they're doing better. And maybe that's where it lives now, is like on these like smaller specials on Disney Plus. They don't need to be big screen or anything. I like that 6-episode series they did. Like, maybe that's where that universe lives, and that's great.
Right. I mean, and I guess I didn't see that Muppet. Was it Muppet Haunted House, or was it specifically actually like the Haunted Mansion from Disneyland? Because,
well, I haven't watched it in a while. I remember Gonzo ends up in this haunted mansion, and he has to stay the night there. And maybe Rizzo's his sidekick, because that's always seems to be the case. And then he would run into like all these ghosts who were played by other Muppet characters. But it was good. It was a fun piece. I think, that's another thing they could do, is like keep developing holiday material. And I think people would really be into that.
Right. I mean, I guess I'm just wondering if it's on track to do like what Disney is doing with The Simpsons, where they just insert the characters into whatever Disney thing they're trying to promote, whether it was the Haunted Mansion or something else. And, we've got The Simpsons in all of these different things. Are we going to get, the Muppet Star Wars or Muppets Meet Marvel or something like that going forward?
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, it is called Muppet Haunted Mansion, and it wasn't Rizzo, it was Pepe the Prawn, who, again, cool, whatever. But yeah, they go, it's in a haunted mansion. And if it is that haunted mansion, like if it's based on the ride, like at least they utilize the Muppets in regard to that, not as opposed to like, hey, we're just sticking them in to like fit this in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it seems like that's what they've done a lot with The Simpsons, although I haven't watched those, but people seem to not care for them.
And there's tons of There's tons of like celebrity cameos in there and stuff like that. So, Josh, I know you said you're not a huge fan, but like I feel like you should go back and at least watch the original Muppet movie, which I think is 79, and just like that's a home run all the way through. The music, the story, the technical achievement. I mean, look, that was such a big deal. Like that, if that didn't work, they weren't going to get other shots, and you see, it's led to like all these other projects, including the often not mentioned Follow That Bird, the Big Bird movie from the 80s, which is also good.
Yeah, and I will say, despite my indifference to the Muppets, as a child, I loved Sesame Street, and Follow That Bird, I believe, is the first movie I ever saw in a theater as a child. So I had an attachment to that. But I think I've probably seen the Muppet movie as a kid. I mean, I think I probably saw all three of those original Muppet movies as a kid. I don't really remember much about them. But I did several years ago go back and watch some of the Muppet Show, which I had never seen. And that was on, I think, when we were real young. And it wasn't something, I didn't have your grandfather. It wasn't something that I was shown as a kid. And this is, pre-streaming. I got some DVD releases of it as a promotional thing. And I thought, I should check this out. And I really disliked it. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think I might have given you, Jason, those DVDs because I was like, I don't want these anymore. You can have them. I watched like 5 or 6 episodes and I thought it was such a slog and not enjoyable at all.
That's wild that you think it's a slog. If you don't like it, you don't like it. But the pace is so fast with them moving from act to act and all the backstage chaos. Like, I feel like that tone really is a very speedy, fun tone for the Muppets.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while, obviously, but I remember feeling the opposite about it, that everything went on for so long and there were all these sort of goopy, sentimental songs that I didn't enjoy at all. And I didn't find it funny. And I mean, there's a lot of pop culture references that I think are sort of lost to time if you weren't around in that moment. But yeah, I think that sort of colored my feeling of like, well, if this is often considered their creative height, it's just not for me.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'll give it to you. It's not for you. You hate fun. We all know that.
I do hate fun. So aside from the Muppets themselves, one other thing that I'm sort of interested in, and it's weird as the time that we're recording this. So there is a song from the Muppet Christmas Carol called When Love Is Gone that is sung by Scrooge's love interest, Belle, that is sort of about their lost love, which is a key plot element in the Scrooge story, and was cut from the original theatrical release. But when this movie was released on home video, initially like on VHS, it was included. And I think because a lot of the following for this movie comes from the home video release, people, even though it's not in the original version, people got really attached to this song. And when it was not in some later releases on DVD and on Disney Plus, there was this like incredible outpouring of like interest in getting it going. And they've restored it. And when I think it was Brian Henson announced, or one of the Muppet producers announced at like D23 this year, it was a huge deal that they had gotten this restored and they were going to put it back in the Disney Plus version. And it is available in the version on Disney Plus as of December 11th, 2022, which is 2 days from now. So we didn't.
What? It's happening?
Yeah. So do you remember that number? Do you care about that at all?
No, I don't care.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we went through that then.
I don't know if I've ever seen it because I told you I hadn't watched Muppet Christmas Carol till recently, last few years.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, people who are huge fans of it, I don't know, maybe my sister is into that song or whatever. I also don't care. But
I mean, we both agreed that, from a song standpoint, it's not like these songs are competing with like the greatest of Muppet songs.
No, the songs are not great. And that song in particular, there's a reprise of it that plays over the closing credits. And watching it this time, I knew that, and I was listening during the credits, and I thought, this is not great. I don't really need another version of this.
I'll have to agree with you on that one, Josh. It'll be interesting to see what happens next with them. I haven't really heard of anything going on with the Muppets.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the next Muppet thing is, but again, it's Disney, so they're going to exploit them in some way, I'm sure. Jason, we talked, you mentioned some of what Paul Williams has done, and we had talked about him, I think, a bit with Smokey and the Bandit. He is still alive and still the president of ASCAP, the Songwriters Association, still does some acting and voice work and is a prolific songwriter and has written some classic songs. I just don't think any of these are among them.
ASCAP, your high school nickname.
That was unnecessary.
I like when you do that. Josh, obviously these are at least in Emmet Otter's Jug-Band Christmas, and also I guess in Muppet Christmas Carol. A lot of classic Muppet performers. Now there's been turnover to the new generation, but Frank Oz, who's like also the voice of Yoda, right? One of the great voice actors of all time, also has directed a number of amazing movies, Little Shop of Horrors, Bowfinger, What About Bob? Last year, he directed that very popular documentary, Derek Del Guadio's In and of Itself.
Oh, man, that's a whole other topic, but I fucking hate that.
So. Well, I didn't see it, but I know it's popular, but he directed that and
yes.
In and Out. So, I mean, look at the other movies I mentioned. Those are good movies.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Lots and lots of great movies. And Frank Oz, who is not involved with either the Muppets or Star Wars anymore, and I think has had some negative thoughts about that.
Right.
But obviously a huge talent. Someone who did not direct a bunch of great movies going forward from this is Brian Henson, but he did continue directing Muppet movies in the 90s. The ones that, Jason, as you pointed out, are not great, that I haven't seen. But since, and I believe he's still involved in some fashion with the Muppets, but less so with those more recent productions. He has made a perhaps ill-advised pivot to adult puppetry and directed the film The Happy Time Murders, one of the most notoriously terrible movies of the last 10 years or so, I think, which is a very R-rated puppet murder mystery thing starring Melissa McCarthy and a bunch of horny puppets and lots of fake puppet violence and blood and semen, and is very bad. Have you seen that, Jason?
No, but I remember when you watched it, you said like, where are the jokes? Where is the humor, right? And that's literally what I'm saying about the movies he's directed with the Muppets here in the 90s.
Yeah, the other adult puppet project that Brian Henson was involved with is a stage show called Puppet Up, which actually was briefly on stage here in Las Vegas. I never saw it. Did you ever see that one, Jason?
I didn't, but it definitely, I feel like that sounds familiar,
Yeah, it was fairly short-lived, but I think it was one of these things where it had a big launch and it was like, oh, Brian Henson from the Muppets, and he's doing this like naughty puppet show here at like the Venetian or something, and then it closed very quickly.
Well, yeah, because we already had Avenue Q, right? That's the one that people love.
Right. And I think Avenue Q is I wonder if Brian Henson saw Avenue Q and thought, why didn't I do that? I need to capitalize on that and make some naughty puppets.
Yes, I agree.
So Michael Caine, I mean, he's a titan of acting, still working steadily at age 89. He's been nominated for 6 Oscars. He won for Hannah and Her Sisters and for The Cider House Rules. What do we want to say about Michael Caine?
Good morning, you kings of New England, you princes of, Princes of Maine, was that it?
Yeah,
good morning,
I think it's good night, not good morning.
Good night, you kings of New England, you princes of Maine. Yeah, look, he's one of the all-time greats. On Inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton, he gave this awesome piece of acting advice where he was in a play and he was just like a bartender, right? And he wasn't speaking in the scene, right? So, the two actors are rehearsing and the director calls cut and he goes, Michael, what are you doing? He's like, nothing. He's like, well, why are you doing nothing? He's like, well, I have nothing to do in this scene. He's like, no, you have nothing to say in this scene. You want to say everything. You want to do this, you want to do that, but you're not, you're just observing. So like just those little tidbits of like always be active for some reason. How do you hold that back? Like, how do you play drunk without looking like you're playing drunk? Like he's a legend, right? He's got that book, I think, with all those acting techniques that kind of goes over stuff like that as well.
Right. No, he is a total legend. And as we've said, I think that is what makes this movie work, is that he is giving it the full weight of his incredible acting talent.
Yeah, Josh, Michael Caine, we keep coming up to these actors on this show who this is their job and their craft, and maybe they don't always make the best movies, but they always want to be working, right? And I think that comes from maybe just a different generation of like, hey, I got to make sure there's food on the table, or this is the work ethic I was brought up in. And I'm sure, I think he said like, yeah, I wish every movie was as good as whatever, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels or, Batman, the Nolan one or whatever. But you got to work. You got to make those movies to get those movies.
Right, of course, he has that famous quote about having appeared in, Jaws the Revenge, saying that I haven't seen the movie and I heard it was terrible, but I've seen the house it paid for and it's beautiful, or something like that. And it's like an all-time famous quote, which I'm sure I'm not quite getting exactly right. But yeah, I mean, it's not like he appeared in Jaws the Revenge because he thought it would be brilliant, but he's always working and it was a job. And I've actually seen that. I can't remember all the details of it, but I'm sure he gives it as much effort being in this terrible shark movie as he does being in a Muppet movie, and he's Michael Caine no matter where he is.
And I think, Josh, like as I had mentioned to you, like that kind of 50s, and I don't think he was working. Yeah, he was working in the 50s and 60s, like British cinema. That's a real kind of like blind spot for my film knowledge, and it'd be interesting to go back because I know that's when he was, really kind of putting those roots down.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if I've seen as many early Michael Caine performances as more recent because he's just constantly working, even now.
Yeah.
So I think the last legacy thing that I wanted to talk about is like A Christmas Carol as this often adapted thing. I mean, certainly even by 1992, it had been made into movies multiple times. And there's always like sitcom episodes where it's like the protagonist of the sitcom gets visited by 3 ghosts or something, and they fit characters into this story. And it continues to be incredibly popular. I mean, just this Christmas season, as we're recording this, there's a new animated version of A Christmas Carol on Netflix with a whole bunch of famous people doing the voices. And I unfortunately recently watched A Christmas Karen, the indie film comedy that uses the Christmas Carol story and gets the whole meme of a Karen into it. So do you have a favorite version of A Christmas Carol, Jason?
No.
Okay, you're not a fan of that.
I'm indifferent to it. I don't. I guess yours is that 1951 movie.
Yeah, that is a great. And I feel like if you're indifferent to the story, like that's just a good movie. And if you think this story is like there's nothing to this story, that performance from Alastair Sim and the way that it's presented in that movie will show you that there is some real emotion to be found in the story of Scrooge.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. I would be open to checking that out. I'm always looking for new Christmas movies.
Yes. So
from 1951.
From 1951, Jason's favorite year in cinema history.
Yeah.
Is there anything else on the legacy of these that you want to mention, Jason?
No, I mean the Muppets have such a canon, right? Like look, if you disagree with us, that's totally fine. But I think it's worth exploring and seeing like what you gravitate to as a fan, or if you're like Josh and none of it works for you, then I'll take your DVDs.
Yeah. There you go. And I did want to say that these have both become perennial favorites. They're both available to stream. And Emmet Otter actually did finally get a theatrical release in 2018. So was able to be seen on the big screen there in a special release back then.
That's cool. Russell and Lillian Hoban, the authors and illustrator, prolific authors, Josh. The Mouse and His Child, Ridley Walker, Bedtime for Francis, Arthur the Chimpanzee. They have so many books published. Like you couldn't even keep count, really, I don't think.
Yeah, but if you did, maybe you would say, 1 book. All
right. He brought it into Sesame Street. Follow that bird, Josh.
Yeah, I loved it when I was 4 or whatever, whenever that was. I don't know. So that is the Muppet Christmas movies, and that is this special holiday episode of Awesome Movie Year. Wish us Merry Christmas online and on social media.
Yeah, or if you're Brandy, tell us to fuck off on social media because
also wonderful holiday sentiment.
Yeah, we just trashed the Muppet Christmas Carol, which fuck off or not is still awful. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. I'm Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. And of course, you could find my website, Go for Jason, somewhere at the bottom of a broken down set from the Muppet Christmas Carol, not being used nearly to its fullest effect anymore. But, movie party, eat this comedy, those are things.
Yeah. You can find me at joshbellhateseverything.com, where I did once write about the Muppet Christmas Carol, if you want to read that. And that's nothing recent, though, on there. Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on Twitter, and at Signal Bleed on Letterboxd. And check out our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And look out next year for my album, The Pup Pups, which must be somewhat inspired by Emmet Otter's band and songs, even though I don't think I've ever actually seen them, but it seems in the same spirit.
What if the Muppets were going to do a Hanukkah movie, who would you base that around?
Is there a Jewish Muppet?
That's what I'm saying. Who would be the Jewish Muppet?
I mean, it would have to be Sandler, right?
Well, no,
he's not a Muppet. That's a real human being, Dave. I don't.
I mean, I thought you meant you'd be turning one into a Muppet.
No,
okay.
I mean, you build a family with Statler and Waldorf, who are obviously two old
Jews.
Jewish vaudevillian comedians, right? You know,
Yeah.
Fozzie, I think could be Jewish. Gonzo is definitely eccentric, like many of our kind, Josh. So I think we can start working on this. Hanukkah from the Muppets.
Get started on that. So thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year, and God bless us, everyone.
Amen!
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.